Can you hear? There you go.
All right. We should be live if you're on Facebook. Hang with us just for a moment. We're going to be letting people in. If you're joining us live via Zoom on the webinar, welcome. You just put into the chat, tell us where are you joining us from? Who are you? Don't worry if you're in the Zoom. Only I can see you really, our team, but your name, maybe what you do, like John, teacher, Washington State, or Sarah, administrator, Michigan, or what part. Let us know where you're at. Lindsay, Katie, ISD, how are you? Snohomish is here. This is always my favorite part. And if you're on Facebook Live, I'll also be trying to jump over and see that happening. But introduce, if you are with us, it's always really cool to see how many different places are represented today talking about this work. I'll dig in just a moment. I see Keith over on Facebook from Ripon, California. How are you, Ripon High School? He said, what's up, CharacterStrong? What's up, buddy? How you holding up? There's a lot going on. This is important work we're going to be talking about today. Excited to be with you all. Thank you for joining us. We got Broward County, Florida. We got Kate from Washington, North Thurston, Washington, Waller, Texas, Katie ISD, San Diego, in the house, Peninsula High School here in Washington, Kennewick, Washington represented. Lots of Washington today. Hopefully the sun's coming out, Washington. Let's hope, Western Washington at least. We got San Antonio, Texas, King County, Washington represented. We got Maine in the house, Galveston, Colleyville ISD, lots of Texas, Saskatchewan, Canada. Saskatchewan, I worked at the University of British Columbia for 8 summers as a resident hockey instructor, focused on character, and SEL was their main focus. Really got me at an early age, focused in on this work, and pretty cool. Love my friends up in Canada. Allison in Washington, Indiana, so many different places. So excited that you're here. It is 11:01. Let's keep this tight. My name is John Norland. I'm one of the co-founders of CharacterStrong, right alongside Houston Kraft. It's our honor to guide this work with an amazing team. And when we say team, not only our internal team, but our team is all of our educators, and educators represents every single person in a building, in a district that is serving students, because everything we're doing is educating in one way or another. And over the last whatever number of days, we're losing track of days, aren't we? But during COVID-19, we've trained over 3,000 educators virtually, Houston and I, through our national virtual trainings. We did one just yesterday with 600 people that were live in attendance. We have schools right now that are booking trainings both virtually and in person, or waiting to see as it stay in person or virtually for August. And all of those schools, all of our educators are with, they're all a part of this team. That this will never be just about the curriculum that we're talking about today. That is only one component of what CharacterStrong is all about. We are about, to be very clear, we're about strengthening the tier 1 foundational supports of any school. And we all know the need for that right now. Just look around. How much of a need with the collective grief and trauma that is happening across our country and beyond, how much of a need is there for this work, and this work to be done intentionally? But when we say this work, it can't just be about the curriculum. In fact, feel free to put it in the chat if you're in Zoom. What do you think the key to all of this work is? When I say this work, even successful implementation of a social emotional learning, character development type curricula, what is the key to all of it? And I'll let some people put some in the chat, but before I do a screen share and put it up, I just want you to hear some of the responses from your peers. And there's so many responses, I'm just trying to keep up with all of them right now. We have people saying about connecting, consistency, relationships. What else is being put in here? Honoring human dignity. Well said, Adrian, thank you. Building trusting relationships, improving student outcomes, consistency and follow through, connecting time, conversations, practicing of the skills. Yeah, the key to fluency is repetition, isn't it? Kids can't benefit from something they don't receive. The more opportunities we give students to practice blank, the more likely they are to develop the habit of blank. How do we move beyond just a week where we talk about this? Like, remember we had that one week or that one assembly? Well, no wonder it doesn't get the traction that we're looking for. How do we really weave this into the daily fabric? I'm still looking for the main answer that I am asking. Let's see, equipping for living, understanding of one another. So good. Relationships and connection. The people who, here we go, here it is. This is related to it. The people who are leading this need to have their own emotional intelligence. Translated, the key to all of this work is the adults. The key to all of this is making time for the adult relational work, the adult behavior change. It's the adult work we have to do first. Any curricula company, anybody who focuses especially on this topic, who doesn't put a prime focus on the adult relational practices and giving time to that adult SEL work is missing the boat. Because we're just saying, then here's the curriculum, good luck. And we all know what's going to happen. It's not going to work. So need to know that although today we're talking about the advisory curriculum, that by itself, it's not enough. We got to layer in the adult work. We got to say, how do we weave this into the school-wide integration, right? That connects to everything else that we're doing in the building. How do we work with a smaller group of students who are representative of our student population and give them a voice where we're giving them more instruction. And because of that, they're empowered to demonstrate those pro-social behaviors that we want to see school-wide. So that we're leveraging in a good way the intentional relationships and influence of student-to-student work. Because we have to bring that part into our tier one. It can't just be what's happening from the adult to student level. What if we could get the student-to-student piece going more intentionally? What if we could get the student-to-staff piece going more intentionally, the student-to-family piece going more intentionally? Now we're starting to talk about a true tier one. So that's the work. Our theory of change are those 4 parts: school-wide integration, adult relational practices, doing that deep work, and we need to do that deeper work, don't we? There's deep work to be done in that space. Are we making time for that work, especially coming back and coming still within this collective grief and trauma? Number 3, tier one curricula that is happening with fidelity, that all students are being exposed to it, right? That all staff are engaging in, not just one teacher over here, all. That's tier 1. And then the 4th component is that student leadership component. What are we doing with a smaller group of students to give them more? Remember this, not just the 5 that got elected. No. Representative of our student population. So within that framework, let's talk about the advisory curriculum today. If you're in Facebook or you're in the Zoom, even if it's right now, what's the number 1 question that you have about advisory curriculum from CharacterStrong? Even if you have one right now, drop it in the chat. While I'm walking you through a couple pieces here, at any point, drop in the chat. Any questions that you might have, our team is pulling them for me so I don't miss them over into a document. I'm going to try to address as many of those as I can, not only during, but then give time for questions at the end. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to put you, instead of a slide deck, I'm going to put you right into our curriculum site so that you can actually see it, like a demo, like a walkthrough. First thing I want you to notice, this is a basic dashboard. If a school was to use our curricula, everybody has the same login and password. Make it easy, right? So that we don't have the issue of like Mr. Smith who keeps losing his password. It's like, Mr. Smith, here's the password. We're all using the same one. Same login and password, you click into it. The dashboard is something new. Instead of it just being the same welcome screen, this is something that's going to regularly be updated. Here's what's coming up. Here's what you need to know that we have. Here's information, for example, on the new CharacterStrong app. For example, also here's a little graduation speech that Houston, our co-founder, put together. Pretty well done, that you can use in different ways. There's also free virtual educator resources. Here's the tab for that. Here's this month's webinars that have already been scheduled. And if they get updated and there's more, you'd see them there. All those webinars are free, just like this one. Some are about the advisory curriculum. Others are on specific topics. Decreasing anxiety and increasing empathy with Dr. Michelle Borba. In fact, the team will put into the chat a link to that webinar that Houston and Dr. Michelle Borba will be doing. Please do register for it. It's going to be awesome. You should be there. It's on June 9th at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And so you can see what's coming up. The weekly blog, the one that just came out today, A System of Inequity We Must Do Better, written by Houston and myself as co-founders of CharacterStrong. And then here's our latest podcast. Here's some upcoming training. So we're always updating this so our staff, our schools know what's going on. And then on the left-hand side, depending on the permissions that our school has, is what is going to show up. So I'm going to take you first into a tab that is Implementation Resources. A quick note, we care as much about the implementation as we do what's actually being taught, because kids can't benefit from something they don't receive. So there's ongoing implementation resources that we're including in here. This is the Theory of Change document that is actually a team self-evaluation inventory. We also can come in and lead fidelity audits for schools in each of those areas that I discussed earlier. There's also currently a validated tool called the ILS, Implementation Leadership Skill, which is what are the behaviors from the administrators, the school leaders that need to be happening for this to be most successful and to be able to be implemented with fidelity. There's also things that you can download in terms of the lesson plans and the images, but let me jump over to grade 6, which starts our middle school curricula. Basic breakdown, middle school curriculum, 35 lessons per grade level, 6th through 8th grade. They're all vertically aligned, which means they're not the same lessons each year. That's important. One of our goals was to remove as many of the famous roadblocks as we know get in the way, especially at the secondary level, that would make this not be successful. Remember, we come from the classroom. I was a high school teacher for a decade. I then moved to the district level where I was the program administrator for the whole child, K through 12. How do we infuse this work through all those different aspects, looking at multi-tiered systems of support for behavior, right? Looking at SEL infusing, looking at the adult relational practice, all the pieces that live on that behavior side, right? That whole child aspect, that was the work. And we know coming from secondary, what gets in the way of this working? Well, one, if they're the same lessons each year, it's not going to work. Okay. 2, it needs to be really easy to implement. So let me click into grade 6, and I'm going to go grade 6, lesson 8, growth mindset overview. They're all vertically aligned. I want you to know that each grade level starts with 2 community building lessons, but then it starts to go into some topics. A topic that changes each week, but starting in lesson 3, a consistent process, a consistent system starts each lesson. It's called the Character Dare process, and I'll take you through that. Here are some of the other roadblocks, though, before I get into this lesson. One is the materials need to be what you naturally would have in the room. If staff or schools have to go get materials each week, it's not going to work. So it's going to be naturally what's in the digital lesson, what you're projecting, right? It could be the students, wherever they are. It could be something to write on, something to write with, something maybe to type on, type with, would be naturally what is there, so that you don't have to go get a bunch of materials. You don't have to make a bunch of copies. If you have to go get actual physical hard copy materials and make thousands of copies, it's going to be a major roadblock and it's not going to work. It needs to be something that literally is as plug and play as possible if it's going to be tier 1. Once again, kids can't benefit from something they don't receive. It needs to be something that was specifically designed for a secondary age student. Too many times where there's a lot of social emotional learning curricula at the elementary level, there's some at the middle, there's almost none at the high school level that's engaging and or relevant. Too many times it's an elementary focus trying to reach up to the secondary level. Doesn't go very well. Where I was leading this work, we kept hearing the same message. Elementary, we were getting good fidelity. Took a lot of work, we were getting good fidelity. Get to the secondary level, and this was the common line. Our kids are, in quote, done with it. We're like, what does that mean? Well, they see it as elementary. It looks similar, it feels similar. I'm like, I need more than that. They're like, well, it's things like role playing. And I'm like, that makes sense to me. As a secondary educator, that makes sense to me. Try doing role playing with a middle school or high school student and see how it works. So how do we get something that's not role playing and yet teaches these skills of social emotional learning and character development? For us, one of those main processes is the Character Dare, and I'll explain that. The bigger point is this. This curricula, the advisory curriculum, was specifically designed for a secondary age student instead of trying to reach up from an elementary focus. Just as important, It was a curricula that was designed for a secondary educator. And all secondary educators in the house know why I'm smiling. A secondary educator is different than an elementary educator. So let's remove many of those. Let's make it easy to implement as much as possible. And our goal is the more the educators get used to it, the more they're going to make it their own. So here we go. Here is the preview mode of this lesson. If I click into it as a staff member, I can click on different things. One, this blue bar, instead of like, here's a 3-page document on growth mindset that we want you to read before next week. That's a roadblock. I can click on that. There's a short little video. Here's what growth mindset is. Here's why it's in the lesson. So I can listen to it. That's quicker. It brings me up to speed. Here's the materials. I'm going to come back to these 4 buttons because that's how you're going to teach the lesson. But as I preview it, it kind of shows me, here's what I could say. Here's what I'm going to ask. If there's an image, I can click on the image and preview it. It fills the screen. If there's a video, I can preview that video and watch it. Here is the preview mode, okay? How I'm going to teach this lesson is these 4 buttons. On these 4 buttons, I can download the lesson plan in black and white or color so that I have the, so to speak, script to guide me. But how I'm going to teach it is I'm going to click onto the slide deck, which is in English or in Spanish. Now I could go full screen, right, for that. And as I click into it, the topic of today is growth mindset. The next click, here's the objectives. The next one, though, goes into our staple process. And our staple process that begins every lesson is the character dare process. The idea here is this. We intentionally bring the social emotional learning right alongside the character development. So our lessons will really intentionally teach very specific social emotional learning skills, from growth mindset, mindfulness, emotional regulation. There's different aspects of those key social emotional learning skills that we teach. In fact, we have a CASEL alignment document that we can send you that says, here's the scope and sequence of the lessons, and then here's the CASEL competency that it lines up with. But one thing that makes us unique is that we intentionally bring the character development piece right alongside the SEL piece. A way to look at it would be this. The competencies of social emotional learning, say the CASEL 5, for those that know, those skills are incredibly important. The character piece gets beneath that. It gets more to the purpose piece. Who is it that you want to be? What values are most important to you? It's not our job to teach students what their purpose is, but what if we got them grappling more with that? And so a way that we can do that is by bringing the 2 together. The way that we do that is through the character dare process. So here's an example. It's a kindness character dare. Lower left-hand corner is where you're going to see the trait. Not all of them are kindness. Some of them are honesty. Some of them are focused on humility. Some are focused on commitment. There's different character traits that are focused on during the years of this vertically aligned curricula. But I actually love this character dare because it's a real practical way. How do we take these abstract values in many cases and make them really practical? This one's titled Delightful Door. The dare goes like this: for 24 hours, or any of these can be modified. I might say as a teacher, if we're meeting once a week, for the next week, stop at each door that you get to and hold it for anyone coming behind you. Now, some of these might be modified. We might have gone through a lot more doors in the past before COVID-19. Eventually, hopefully, we're coming out of that. But I love this because how many times do we just walk through something and we don't even look? We don't even notice if someone's coming behind us. It gives them something practical to do, to be thinking of others. Once that is there, I might say, class, here was last week's character dare. The next slide is where the power is in that process. The power in that process is the truth or dare process. Once staff get to know that it's coming, they get used to it. It's not a surprise. So that's key, because then it eases that mind a bit, where I know it's going to be the same process each week, but the conversation is going to be different. So think about this through the lens of moving beyond role playing to what if we give a scenario where we can connect a lot of different conversations related to what we're learning ongoing. What if we can move into the proactive through this process instead of feeling like we're always living in the reactive? And so the reason why this process works is it meets students right where they're at. Instead of, all right, who did it? Well, that's not going to work. We know what's going to happen. We're not going to require students to do these character dares. That's going to work against us. We're not going to grade them on whether they do the character dares. That's going to work against us. No, we need to realize that for some of us in certain character dare, just facing it is the character dare itself. I may not be ready. So the conversation turns to this. Staff, as long as they've had proper professional development, which we can provide, it's not required, but we support schools with professional development regularly. Our goal is if they've had proper professional development, they should be able to click into these lessons 30 seconds before and teach these lessons. That's the goal. They get used to this process, which is pre-correct. It is okay to not do these character dares each week. You're not going to do all of them. That's all right. But the expectation is this, that every week, everybody has a voice, which means either speak your truth. What do you think about this week's character dare? Agree with it? Disagree with it? What made it hard? What made it easy? What do you think about it? Speak your truth or reflect on your experience trying it. I remember there's a high school version of this that is similar, and it was an interesting reflection. I had a high school student once that said, dare, I did it, and it got awkward. And what we train our teachers on is to do two things, and you need to train them on it because it's not always the same skill sets as teaching. Facilitation is a unique skill set. And so let's give real practical, two things. Number one, acknowledge everything that is shared. So in that setting, awesome. Thank you so much for your honesty. Number two, ask good questions. So the simple question there is, what made it awkward? And I remember the high school student said, well, I held the door and it was a student, another student, and she was about 15 feet away and she started running, which was a great moment in class because everyone started laughing because we could all picture that moment. And I asked in that moment as the teacher, like, has anybody else experienced something like that? And they're like, yeah, yes. But then I dig deeper, ask good questions. I said, well, like, what else happened in that moment? Did you say anything? And he's like, I think I said, like, have a great day or something like that. I said, what else was happening? He's like, well, we both laughed. And I said, did you know that student? Like, were you friends? He's like, no, I didn't really know her. And I said, well, let me ask one like follow-up to that. Because that moment happened, where you had that laughter, even though it was a little bit awkward, and you said, have a great day. If you were to see her again in the hallway, would you be more likely to acknowledge her, to smile, to say hello than you would have been before? And I'll never forget, it was just a quick answer. Absolutely. And on a basic foundational level, think about it. What if we gave many opportunities for students to connect, to see each other in different ways? Sometimes it starts with little practical ways that could lead to more, where we laugh, where we connect, where we see each other, where maybe we start to, at some levels, even empathize. It's an interesting thing that happens when we trust the process of truth or dare and allow students to have a voice, even to speak their truth. I disagree because of this. And then, remember, this is a 6th grade lesson. We send them with a new dare for the week. This one's called Pay It Forward. It's a kindness character dare. Show a random act of kindness today. We've all heard that before, but the key to this dare is the second half of it, without looking for something in return. Think about the conversation that's going to happen next week. And as a teacher, I already know that my focus on that next week, sure, people might share some different things that they did, random acts of kindness, great. The conversation really is going to revolve around doing something without looking for something in return. There's power in that process. This becomes the first 5 to 7 minutes of the lessons that we do. There might be a quick turn and talk, student to student, share your truth or dare statement, and then always come full group to hear some responses out loud. Trust that process, that we have a consistent process of discussing this. When we've done fidelity audits on this, where we've gone in and done random interviews with students and then random interviews with staff, we always ask questions about the character dare process. Over 90% of students said the character dare process is a good thing. It is a good thing. We don't have enough conversations like this. This is important. We should do this. Over 60% of staff said in year 1 of implementation, well, I wasn't sure if my students would be into it. So I kind of struggled with implementation. You got two counter messages that are happening there, and it all points back to what's the key to all of this work? It's the adult work. It's the adult behavior change. It's the adults becoming more comfortable with the work. It's the adult relational practices that needs to happen. That's the beginning of every lesson. And then it gets into the topic of the day. In many of the lessons, there might be what's called a set the stage video. A set the stage video is someone other than the classroom teacher talking about, one, here's who I am. Today you're going to be talking about growth mindset, and here's why it's important. And I think that I've got let me do this real quick. I want to make sure I have the audio that is turned on here. Give me 1 second. Yep, I have it here. Just want to play just a little. Oh, let's see where it went. I might have lost it. Let's see where I have too many documents open. Here we go. Nope, that's not it. Well, let me do this. As I'm bringing this hopefully back up in just a moment, I can go to some questions as well. I might have lost my screen there, but I'll bring it back up. Let me go to a couple questions, then I'll bring it up and see where I am at. Okay, one question. How do all 30 lessons get done in 36 weeks? Great question. It's called intentional scope and sequencing and working in what you do. A better question might be this. Do you have to do, for example, all 35 lessons if other things come up? And the answer to that is no. Some of our schools, in fact, many of our schools, in the first year, they may only do 19. They may only have 19 available time slots to be able to implement in year one. And what they can do is it's customizable. They can pick which lessons they feel would work best for them in that first year, knowing that they're vertically aligned. And then many schools in year two might start layering in more lessons. It says, what supports are available? For us, it's a lot of ongoing supports that we provide to our schools. We can do ongoing trainings. That includes tier 1 trainings, which is your whole staff. We do virtual trainings that could be more for your teams. We do the fidelity audits where we can come in and really help on the implementation side of things. And then we're always putting together more and more content for our schools. So webinars that are on the topic, podcasts, blogs each week that people can dig into. And so we're always putting out more and more support. I'm on implementation calls every single day with schools. Last Friday, I was on 14 Zoom calls before 11:30 a.m. So we're regularly working with our schools to implement more intentionally and to help them out. Let's see, how much will my teachers have to plan? Well, it depends on how much time you give to it, right? If you give proper time to the professional development side, the goal that I shared with you is this. Our goal is they should be able to click into it 30 seconds before and teach that lesson. Now, what kind of an implementation team do you have? Are they sending regular reminders? Like, all right, here's the lesson that we're doing this week. Here are the 3 things that you need to know, right? They're giving them some tips that are about that. And so that implementation piece really matters. But the goal is that they need little to minimal prep to make it happen. I'm not in full screen mode, but I do want you to see. If I can click through this to start intentionally, right? If there's a question, right? You just click through that lesson. This is the goal, that this is how it can be taught. If there's a video, you can play that video. Many of us have seen this video before, The Power of Not Giving Up, right? If the discussion questions are there, you'd click through it. But this is kind of the style of how the slide decks go. If there's an image, it's right there so that you can see it. And that same slide deck is also in Spanish, right? This is not full screen, but just so you can see it, the character dares. So both lessons in English and in Spanish, if it's student facing, that is click and go as much as possible. Okay, I'm gonna answer a couple more questions, then I'm gonna show you a high school lesson. Let's see here. How do I keep my students engaged in the weekly session? I face a lot of refusal to participate. Yeah, I mean, really what we're talking about is buy-in, and that's a whole implementation approach. There's not one thing that you can do that's gonna change all that. But the number one way to increase student buy-in is to increase staff buy-in, which also includes giving staff, when they get past the Yes, we're all in. It's giving them more tools and strategies. Having done the character dare process at the high school level for over a decade, where I didn't just have the stereotypical student leaders that were in my class. It was almost a tier 1 strategy, which means by the time that in our high school of 1,800 students, by the time they were done with the second semester of their sophomore year, I had almost 80% of the student body that came through that class. So I had the wide range of students that were coming through that. And what I learned was whenever I wanted to increase student buy-in when it came to, say, the character dare process or the lessons, then I increased my buy-in, which means I shared my reflections on the character dare process, where I was struggling, what made it hard, which means I needed to dig into that work as well in my own personal relationships. And obviously I was mindful of what I was sharing and how I was doing it. But when students see that I'm struggling with it, that I'm going after it, then naturally they also can increase. How many times is that not the case? Right? So when we talk about how do I get my students to be more bought in during the year, well, one, it's also understanding that how many years are you into it? That it makes sense that something's not going to take in 1 year. Is this something that they know is sticking around? Are we leveraging a smaller group of students, right, to be demonstrating those pro-social behaviors school-wide so that we're going the student-to-student piece? So that's why the implementation part matters so much. I'll go 2 more questions, then I'll show you a high school lesson and then come back. It says, how often will advisory groups need to meet in order to complete the curriculum? That's up to the school, but the ideal setting is that this is more of a once a week type of setting. Right? Once again, not everybody can always do that. Maybe 1 month you get 3 times in. Maybe the next month it's 4. Maybe the next month is November and you only can get 2 because there's Thanksgiving and something else, right? So the key is this. The key to fluency is repetition, right? Even common sense is this. If we're doing it once a month, we know what's going to happen. They're going to be like, what was that thing that we were doing again last month? So how do we get more frequency when it comes to that dosage with what we can do? How do we address the issue of time commitment to learning a new commitment? Yeah, you got to take it head on, right? How do you address the issue of a time commitment to learning a new curriculum? Well, let's talk about what the curriculum is. We're talking about social emotional learning. We're talking about the skills that are most needed for not just students, but staff to be successful. And yet for many years, it's just been given kind of some lip service on the side. Yeah, try going back to school in the fall and not putting a focus on this area. I mean, I don't need to be harsh, but we have to be real. Try not putting a focus on this area and see how it goes. In fact, I would recommend that you don't do that because our kids deserve more than that. They're going to need more than that. Think about the collective grief and trauma that is happening. If we think we're going to go right back just into the academic side, I think many of us are going to be in for a rude awakening. So we talk about making that time. Let's talk about the difference between academic engaged time, AET, and time dedicated to instruction, TDI. At the secondary level, sometimes we think we've got academic engagement and we don't. We've got time dedicated to instruction. What if because you are creating a nurturing environment where kids are actually ready to learn because we're taking care of the basic needs that are there, even down to a basic level, like students have a hard time learning from someone they don't like. Students have a hard time learning from someone who they feel doesn't like them. That by creating that kind of environment, tier 1, we're talking about all students. How much time are we getting back? What if you got 10 minutes back a day because of the intentionality of your approach? 10 minutes a day times 6 period at a secondary level. Let's say you didn't do it every day. Let's say you did it half the time. So let's say 90 days where you got 10 minutes back a day of more academic engagement than you already had. How many days did you just get back? You know, time is an interesting thing when we talk about, yeah, it takes time, it takes work, but what do we get back? And any good teacher who's focused on relationships knows exactly what I'm talking about right now. We got to make that case. We got to give the why and the how needs to be doable. It needs to be low burden as much as possible with the opportunity for high impact. It says, let me jump over to show you a high school one, and then I'll come back to the questions. Very relevant right now in our year 1, and some of you saw the year 1 track. Some schools will decide to do a year 1 track versus grade level. Year 1 track would be this. Everybody's going to be implementing the same lessons in year 1. We're not going to tell the grade 11s that they're the 9th grade ones, but we're just going to do a year 1 track because we want everybody to be on the same page. We want to brand the character dares school-wide. Sometimes schools who are mixed grade level look at it more as a year 1, year 2 track, or the idea that at the high school level, we have 100 total lessons that are vertically aligned. At the middle level, that we have 105 lessons that are vertically aligned that we can use in a lot of different ways. So it's very customizable. But in grade 9, there are similar topics that you'll see at the middle level. They're not the same lessons, but there's also different ones. You know, grade 9, lesson 17, here's a lesson. It was created by our main equity consultant, CharacterStrong, who did a full equity audit on our curricula. This one's on biases, prejudices, and preferences. It's to set the stage for a set of civil discourse lessons that are part of the curriculum. I've already gone through the basic breakdown of this, but I want to show you the slide deck here. And this one might work if I play it. I don't know if you'll hopefully see hear the audio. You can put in the chat if it is, but here's the objectives. And here's the character dare. So remember, the topic might be on biases, prejudices, and preferences. There's always a character dare to start. This one's on honesty, to give you a different look at one that's a high school dare. I love this one. It's titled Identity Alignment. Write down 5 things that you want to be about and or value. Go back through your last 20 social media posts or think back on your last 5 conversations, right, if they're not on social media, to see if they fit those 5 things. Interesting truth or dare conversation on this one. This would be a great adult character dare. Trust that process, meet them right where they're at, speak your truth, reflect on your dare, and then here's a new character dare for the week. So that process stays the same, but then we get into the lesson. And this one also has a set the stage video. This one's Samir.
Hey, I'm Samir Chaudhry. I'm a filmmaker here in Los Angeles. And today we're talking about civil discourse. So one thing in the films that we make, we like to express our opinions. And right now there's a lot of opinions available on the internet. People express their opinions through social media, through blogs, and there's just more opinions than have ever really been out there. And oftentimes those opinions are one-sided. So what's really important is that before we go into making a film or expressing our opinion, we try and learn as much as we can about the topic from both sides. And we really try and understand it from even a side that we don't agree with. Now, that's not something that comes easy. That's a skill set that you have to develop. It takes practice. It takes a lot of open-mindedness, and that's what we're talking about today, civil discourse.
So when you think about starting to dig into some really relevant and important topics, right? Even civil discourse, the ability, right, to have that dialogue, to have an open mind, right? And so we have lessons that dig into that topic, that start to create the foundation so that we can go deeper. But the implementation of the lesson is clicking through it, using that as a guide, right? This is a high school lesson. And another example, remember, tier 1 is tough. We got to create it where even Mr. Smith in quotes, right? I'm just making that up, but like who we know might struggle. It needs to be as easy as possible for him to implement. We also know that, you know, if you already have champion teachers, whatever you give them, they're going to take and they're going to run with it, right? But this gives a more consistent way of making sure that all students are being exposed in some way or another to these different skill sets, different topics, once again, all vertically aligned. I'm going to answer a couple more questions, then I want to show you, if you're staying on, a reason to stay on right now is I'm going to show you something that we're doing right now to go even beyond these lessons, to knowing that when school comes back in the fall, it might look a little different, right? So we want to have some resources that will meet any one of those needs. What if we're fully virtual? What if we're part virtual and part in person? What if we're in person, right? But we can't do this. What if we're virtual and our teachers are not required to teach anything live? It just send it out once a week and then the students respond. What if we are virtual, but they can teach it live? We want to be responsive to every one of those needs and do as much of that heavy lifting as possible. So in a moment, I'm going to show you an example of what we've been developing to help schools in that way. Like, what if you're truly virtual? Could you still use this? Couple questions. How do you implement school character dares if you do it by grade level? Should we just continue doing specific grade level lessons, but make the DARE school-wide, that's a choice. That's an example of school-wide like implementation choice. If you were to go by grade level, technically they're not doing the same character dares each week, right? So some prefer that. They don't want everybody doing the same, because you might have a student who goes like, oh, you're just doing it because, you know, the school, you're just doing it, you know. Whereas if it was by grade level and it's not as out there, sometimes that is a choice that people want. Different character dare focuses by grade level. But because the lesson system of that character dare is the same, you also could do the same character dare as a school, but have those different by grade level lessons. So if we were a staff, 6th grade's doing a growth mindset lesson this week, but they have the character dare process. 7th grade might be doing goal setting. 8th grade might be doing a lesson on empathy, but we're doing the same truth or dare process around this specific character dare. So it takes a little bit of intentionality, but it is totally doable. Let's see. We will be rolling out the advisory curriculum this coming school year, 2021. What is the best way to do this at the high school level, 9th through 12th graders? How do you train staff? I'll speak to this and then I'll show you what I was talking about in a moment. I would encourage you to jump on a call with me if you have specific implementation questions, because every school is different, but I'm going to give you an answer to that. Some schools know that you can't just do kind of like temporary pilots that show that like, we're not really all in on this. We're just going to kind of do this little grade level over here or whatever. And they realize that we have to be all in. Whereas other schools might say this, you know what, we're going to start with the transition year, especially at the high school level. So we're going to focus on the 9th grade year to start, and then we're going to gradually add in other grade levels. Sometimes to increase buy-in at the older grade levels, because you have to think through that. If I'm a 12th grader and I've never seen this before, it's going to be a roadblock. Like, what is this thing? So we need to think, how do we intentionally bring them into the fold intentionally, that they feel like it's different, that it's unique, that it's really thoughtful for them. And one way I've seen schools do that well is they use the older students to, and not all of them, but they try to get a bunch of them to partner with the younger grade teachers, and they team teach the lessons. So 12th graders who are team teaching the lessons with the 9th grade teachers, for example. So there are different ways to roll that out, but I think the key to that question about high school, and it can be done at middle as well, is we have to think more like a business. We need to brand ourselves. What is it that we're about? And let's move past the, at times feels like contrived, like we're safe, respectful, responsible. You can do that at the elementary level. But what are you about? What's your branding? Something that students could get behind. I use this example a lot, but I think it's a great one. I always shout out Eastlake High School in Washington State's got just a great example. Even if you don't like them because of sports or whatever, they got a great example. They've got their core values that they're about, but they branded themselves. They're the Eastlake Wolves. So think about it, high school folks that are with me today. They're the Eastlake Wolves. And so their branding is this: we are Wolf Strong, Pack Strong. WSPS. And they have branded the heck out of it. WSPS is everywhere. And it's not just sports, it's also what we do in the school. And they even have a WSPS week at some point during the year. But everything points to that overall branding, and their messaging is around this. It has both the individual and the collective focus. So it's kind of like the idea, you do you. You better you. And by bettering you, we're also going to better our greater whole. That's what they've done, and they do a great job. So one way to get traction with this at the high school level is, how do we really integrate it into our school-wide focus and effort? And that takes intentionality. Let me do one showing, and then I'll address a bunch of questions right here at the end. I want to show you an example of an added piece that we are bringing in. And our goal is that the first half of next year will be taken care of in this way. So this is beyond even the lessons that I was just showing you. One thing we're going to do with each of those lessons is, or with those lessons, is we're going to create a template. A template where if a school is saying we still want to do the same scope and sequence, even though we might be virtual, and we're going to show a template of how you can take those slide decks and not keep them at 30 minutes. That's going to be too long if we're virtual, but like to reduce the length of that, how to do a screen share, so that if you wanted to, as a school, you could create one, push it out to your teachers. Your teachers, if they wanted to use that as a guide, could to make their own. But we know that still that's going to be a big roadblock, but there are some who are ready to do that and want to do that. We will create a template for you so that you can use it as a guide to do that with the lessons as they are written, with guidance around how do you modify certain ones, knowing that we can't do physical contact, that kind of thing. but we're going to go beyond that. And one of the things that we're doing is we just came up with the first 5 sessions. We call them the student sessions on stress, coping, and resiliency skills. We're going to add more. There might be a series on emotional regulation. So a bunch of them that are very specific and rooted in right now needs of students and staff. To give you an example, when I click into this student session, when I click into it, here's Houston, our co-founder. And these are going to be ready to go in multiple formats. So one, if you are teaching it live but virtual, there is a slide deck. So you can click on it, and this is not a 30-minute lesson. It's like a 10-minute lesson. The video is 10 minutes or less, and I could click through it. Here's what student session number 1 is. Here's the video that we could watch together. And then it talks about some research-backed strategies around the idea of like name it to tame it, the managing, the dealing with our emotions. So we have our research scientists who behind the scenes, Dr. Smith, who's doing this work, and then our job, put it together in an engaging and relevant way. And I'll show you how it works in a moment. Talks about in this first one, threat versus challenge. And then every one of these sessions has 3 things that Houston gives the students. And I'll show you, there's 6 students who have come together from different backgrounds, different walks of life, who are talking about what are they dealing with during this time, the different emotions that are involved. And at the end of each session, they're given a dare, so a character dare to use our language. You can kind of see what's there. It's around like naming that feeling that we've been experiencing most. There's a strategy. So in the first one, it's around teaching something called figure 8 breathing. And then there's a practice of gratitude. It's hard to have a negative thought and a grateful thought at the same time. So each one of these sessions has these 3 things and slides that you could use, or if you don't have that ability, you can just play the video. And as I go through the video, Houston introduces
we might respond to it.
Then there's students.
And an emotion.
Robert Cordejo, I'm 16, and something about me is that, you know, I'm a huge sports fan.
About what they're going
I've been
through.
writing songs for about a year and a half, and so far written 7 songs.
Enthusiast. I love listening to and analyzing music and making playlists more than anything. And
learning them, reading them, just anything about a bunch of different languages. And one emotion I'm feeling right now is
speaking and also actively listening. And I think one thing
And then
us or
Houston
hurt us.
ties it together.
It can help
Even
others
at the
or
end,
hurt
I think
others.
he takes them through the figure 8 breathing.
Breathe out. So it's both like a tactile experience, like I'm feeling something, which is important, and then I'm slowing down my breath and becoming more conscious of my breath, which allows.
And what's really cool about it is this. They come back each week, same students, having taken these 3 things, like the dare, the strategy, and the gratitude, and they have a conversation around it, kind of like the truth or dare. If I remember correctly, one of the students gives very authentic response coming out of this one, like in lesson 2, which is like, truth, I didn't do that breathing thing. I thought it was kind of silly, kind of stupid. It's like, that's so authentic. That's so real. That's a great response that I might hear in my high school classroom. But what's great is another boy that was in there is like, I kind of thought the same thing, but like my family's moving. We're in the middle of COVID-19. There's all this going on. My whole world's kind of turning upside down. And I kind of like, I tried it and it worked. And that's the kind of authenticity that we're looking for. They come back the next week, and the second lesson is on the research-backed strategy of shift and persist. So they're given these different things, 10-minute tight lessons. So technically you would have these that you could push out once a week, 10 minutes in length, possibly more engaging that a student might actually watch, that they could respond to in one of different ways. And what we are doing is working incredibly hard right now to provide these as your school's coming back into session that you could use in a lot of different ways. This is the kind of responsiveness that we want to have for our schools. All right, I'm gonna jump over to questions in just a moment. I wanna show you also that there is something called the CharacterStrong Gym that most of our schools use with it. One thing I just wanna focus on with this, there's a whole restorative practices, tier 1 strategies that are included. There's also staff character dares that are in here, admin character dares, and family character dares that you can send out instead of it just being about kindness. It's like proactive relational strategies, many of which are from staff to student. Some are staff to staff, some are staff to family. I'll just show you one example. I love this example. The student becomes the master. This week, it could be done digitally as well. Add to your entry task this question. What is one thing that you could teach me as your teacher? You learn a lot that way, things that students are good at, that are passionate about, and gives me something that I could then connect with my students on, practical strategies that we could use in a lot of different ways with our students. There's ones for families, ones for admin, one for staff, but this is the last one, and then I'll answer questions for the last 10 minutes here. The activity library. People love this. It's like, okay, what if we are back and we're not doing the advisory lessons, but I'm a 10th grade science teacher, or it could be 8th grade, math teacher, and I want to do something in my class to help build community, but I don't have the skills, I don't have the tools. So I come over here and I click, and it's all tagged. 9th and 10th grade is what I teach. The time I have for this activity is only 1 to 10 minutes. I don't have a lot, but I want to give it some time. The group size, not individual, not partner. I want to do a small group activity, and you notice that things are moving. The risk level is low. Because they don't know each other very well. And then the type of activity, not an energizer, not an icebreaker, not a name game. I want to do a get to know activity. Based on how I just tagged it, multiple activities come up. I might click into That's Me and go, I don't like that one. But I might click into Reception Line and go, I can do this. Materials, none. Basic instructions, simple debrief questions. And that tagging feature is huge for teachers to have more resources that they could use. All right. I'm going to jump out of that. I'm going to answer some questions. Someone asked, could you speak to how racial equity is addressed in the curriculum? So number one, I think when that question is brought up and how important, not only has that been now, but for a long time. The number one thing that you need to hear to that is our ongoing commitment to that work. That's not a one-time thing. That's not a one-day thing. That is an ongoing process. We have equity audits that are consistently happening at CharacterStrong. Last year was a big one, but that's not enough. Wave 2 is now happening. One of the big focuses right now is, after last year going through every lesson and looking at the language that was used, the examples that were being used now, it's even deeper than last year's, which is who's being represented in the video clips that are used and how are they being represented. In the resources that we've created for staff, the staff only facing, who is speaking, right? Who is doing that instruction? Is it representative of all of our students and staff that we represent? So number one is understanding that ongoing commitment, because that's going to be ongoing. It's going to be influencing the decisions that we are making and what is being used in the curriculum. The second one, and I don't know when that question came in, but showing that the lessons that we're bringing in are starting to dig into that we have intentional things where from a tier 1 level. Now remember, tier 1 means all staff need to be able to teach this, which we all know what's the next point to that. We got to do the staff work. So part of that equity audit for us is doing that staff work. What is happening in our trainings? How are we really intentionally setting the stage for that work, knowing that we need help in that work? So we're asking for help. We're digging in ourselves. Houston and I as co-founders, as middle class, white, privileged males, are doing work in that area ourselves. We need to become more aware. We need to be doing our own work, and we are committed to that work. And we invite any of our schools to be jumping on calls with us, to be talking about what they're seeing. How can we be serving that work better? And so hopefully that is an answer that we could continue to dig into, because we know that we need to open up that conversation even more. Let's see. So with that in mind, are there structures in place to move this important SEL and equity work to a distance learning online format? What might that look like? That's a great question. That's where we're pivoting. That's where we're working hard to try to make that happen. And if you've got thoughts on that, let's dig into that, because we're digging into that right now to be able to provide that. Let's see. Has your team been able to study the efficacy of implementation at a tier 1 level? So we have mini studies, and then we have some bigger ones that are going right now. Those take time, and everybody knows those take time. An ideal gold standard study is 50 plus schools. You know how much that costs? On average, $1.5 to $3 million. And yet there's a cut in those types of studies in terms of the funding for those. So we're self-funding multiple studies by having an outside group though doing it. And don't you love it that this year's was a lot of fun? It's hard to have a successful study when you have pre-data, and how do you get that post-data? So some of the student session videos that I made or showed you that we made together as a organization were an immediate response to we need to still provide our schools things that they could use who are in the middle of this study so we can get post data. So we're excited over time and committed to that work to be sharing those different results. The other thing that we can share with you is an evidence supporting CharacterStrong document that Dr. Clayton Cook put together for us that really talks about the unique approach that we have, which is not only here's the evidence supporting what it is that we're teaching, here's the evidence supporting the implementation approach that we have to this work. And so please do reach out. We would love to share that with you. Here's a question. Is CharacterStrong aligned to the Washington State SEL standards? Yes. And we have a document that we could share with you on that. So please reach out. For those that are in Washington, know that Washington basically is the 5 CASEL competencies plus 1. So it's pretty aligned with most other states who have aligned themselves with CASEL, C-A-S-E-L. So you should look them up, right? The CASEL competencies. Washington State is CASEL plus 1. So we can share that document with you and how it aligns to those. It says, if we're a 2-grade middle school, 7th and 8th grade, what grade levels should we do with our school? 6 and 7? We started with 6 across the board last year. Should we do 6th with our 7th this year and 7th with our 8th? A lot of options there. You can do any combination. And if you want to ask specific questions, feel free to reach out. We can do an implementation call. But you could do any one of those combos. You could drop into 7th the next year. But you can look at it because if you're a 2-grade level school, you've technically got those 3 grade levels to use because it's sold as a middle school curriculum. So even if you're 2 grade levels, you would have access to all 3. And I'd love to talk through that more specifically with you. It says, I'm the new middle school division head for a small 60 students, independent school grades 5 through 8. How can I include 5th grade in this program designed for 6 to 8? I think the way to do it, if you're using just our curriculum, is to look at those lessons as we have 105 lessons. So is it everybody implementing like year 1 track, then year 2, then year 3, and how many slots do you have for that dosage? That would be a way to do it. Sometimes we have schools who their elementary is K through 4, and so they're using our Purposeful People toolkit. And if you're a district person, I'll have the team drop in the chat. We're doing one, I think it's tomorrow, a webinar on our elementary product that you can learn more about, but sometimes they'll even have the 5th grade use that. And then the 6th, 8th, that's a choice that you could make, but there is a way to use it. And lots of our schools who are 5 through 8 use the 6th to 8th grade curriculum in that way. Do these lessons reflect the ASCA standards and competencies? Yes. In fact, our elementary toolkit has a document that was just made for that, but it absolutely hits the ASCA model. I still remember my friend Jeannie at the district that I was in. She was overseeing comprehensive guidance. I was overseeing the other side, like the whole child work, and we were hand in hand and know very well the ASCA model. Kat Pastor, who is a champion down in Arizona, who is the National Counselor of the Year. Her school at the high school level uses this work. She knows it well. So if we can even connect you with anybody, let us know on speaking more to that. It says cost. Lots and lots of how much does it cost questions is what the team put in the chat. Yeah, so reach out to us. Individual school, if it's an advisory curriculum, the upfront is $3,999. Some schools say, whoa, that's a little bit higher than maybe at times we were expecting. Our ongoing, starting in year 2, $499 a year to keep everybody in that web-based platform. Usually the response there is, oh my goodness, that's incredibly low. And that includes any and all updates that we make to the curriculum. So we're always looking at the feedback, right? Which lessons are being rated lower? Which lessons are being rated higher? Right now, the need to be responsive to needs that are happening. Anything that we update to make sure that it's staying engaging and relevant, which means you need to update it. If not, it's going to sit on that digital shelf and get dust. All of that is a part of that annual renewal at that lower cost. Now, there is bundling options. So if you're at the district level and you're doing multiple schools, that upfront cost comes down. If you're purchasing even just with another middle school in your district, that upfront cost comes down. So there's bundling, including bundling if you're like, we want the advisory curriculum, we want the CharacterStrong gym, we want professional development, which could be in person or live virtual. We want the on-demand professional development that has 7 different, if you buy sometimes in a bundle, that can also bring the upfront cost of the curricula down. Let's see, could we motivate full participation with some sort of a reward system? That's a great question. Many schools who are PBIS type of schools, this beautifully connects with it. In fact, it actually solves a problem many times that comes with like schools who struggle to get like continued traction in that space. Think about it this way. PBIS and that extrinsic reward system The carrot, it plays a role. It can work for a while, but many people get frustrated because it doesn't get traction over time. What if we actually were doing the intrinsic work as well? What if we had more ongoing, something that they could be, right, recognizing for when it comes to actually teaching of these traits? So it really does a great job of giving you something that you can do, a reward system connected to that. Does your curriculum address working with groups and dynamics? Examples for boarding schools. Maybe reach out, just because our time is short, with some specifics on that instead of trying to unpack and figure out what you mean there. So please do reach out. I'm just John, John, @characterstrong.com. Would love to talk to you about that. Is there any modified to SPED portions of the curriculum? So we're working right now for the first time on creating some tier 2 resources for students who need a little bit more. But think about it this way. Sometimes this comes up in these conversations, and we get a lot of guidance from Dr. Clayton Cook. This is a tier 1 curricula. So tier 1 at that foundational level of your school. And it's like, how do we really intentionally braid in so that this is for all students? Well, like anything else, whether it's behavior, whether it's special needs or whatever, there's modifications that need to be made, right? That's just good practice. And so naturally, there are things that we're going to need to do within a school to provide sometimes extra supports for that. But at the high school that I was at, where I was teaching this every day in an elective, we were a fully inclusive school. And I had many students who were coming through our SPED program that were part of that class, and it worked incredibly well in that. Now, there were certain modifications that needed to be made, but please reach out with specific questions. But naturally, to meet every specific need, there's going to be a level where that responsibility is on the school to meet some of those diverse needs in terms of creating modifications. And usually schools have a lot to help with that as well. Let's see. How much want to teach? I have a plan. I think I answered that. I think I got most of them here. All right. I do want to end with this. We do always want to give some discounts. So some people will be watching this afterwards, but if you're here and you're interested, I know this is buying season. Some people even today were like, I need to spend my money by June 30th. Some are like, it opens up on July 1. We can work with any of those situations, but we do have a discount code that either was put in the chat or will get put in the chat again. If you use, when ordering, all in caps, CS webinar, we'll have $200 off the advisory curriculum if you purchase this week. So that's a discount, and it could be a discount on top of anything else that you do. So if you're bundling, it could be that on top of any other discount. We do have the elementary webinar tomorrow. Would love to see you there. Houston's going to be leading that. And then our upcoming webinar with Dr. Michelle Borba is going to be awesome. You should register for that. And finally, if you want to see samples, they're dropping it in the chat right now. Hopefully it gets over on Facebook as well. But you can click in and you can actually get into the curricula site that I was just showing and see samples, like get into that samples experience, not a PDF, like actually get in there and click around so that you can see it and hopefully see the ease of implementation. That was a lot. My voice is tired. Let's keep the conversation going. We know this work is important. We want to serve you in any way we can. And although there's a lot of adversity and unknowns, know a couple things. Number one, we are being incredibly responsive to the needs that you have, and we want to do that heavy lifting for you. The heavy lifting that we know we're not going to have the time to do yet. Number two, we have to take this work tier 1. We know how important it's going to be. And even with budget cuts and other things, I want you to think about this lens. When the budget cuts come and we know that something is important, what we have to do is we have to then make the work that we're doing go tier 1, which means all staff are engaging in it. All staff are responsible for it. And that's the work that we are in. Prioritizing this work is incredibly important. And if you've got something and you're just learning here today and you've got something in the SEL space that is working, that's not character strong, good, do that. But do the work because the kids deserve it. If there's an area that we can help you, even if you're doing something else, but we can help the professional development side, right? To help give the why and the how of weaving it in, we would love to help you. If there's anything we can do to help you, we are here. Let's do this work together. Thank you so much for participating today, and we look forward to talking to you soon.